Welcome back to English from A to Z. This is the deep dive, where we take a stack of challenging information, really dig into the core mechanics, and deliver the most useful, transformative knowledge directly to you.
And today, well, we are tackling what is maybe the single biggest source of frustration, hesitation, and anxiety for pretty much every serious language learner out there. We're talking about the internal translation loop.
Oh, yeah, you know that feeling all too well, right? It's that moment you're mid-conversation and suddenly your brain is just racing. You're trying to translate like every single idea word for word from your native language. Then you're trying to assemble it, checking grammar rules in your head, and then finally trying to speak. But, before you can even get the words out, bam, you've hit this mental wall. And you end up with these jumbled sentences or those weird pauses where you just freeze up. Or maybe you just completely lose track of what you wanted to say in the first place.
Exactly. That lag time, that hesitation, that isn't really about a lack of vocabulary or, not knowing enough grammar. That's a pure processing bottleneck. It's the gap between knowing the language on paper, let's say, and actually sounding fluent, natural, spontaneous. We often call the translation detour. And our mission today, really, is to give you the strategies to, well, eliminate it completely.
Absolutely. And look, we aren't interested in just throwing more vocabulary lists at you. That's not the point here. Our goal in this deep dive is to introduce you to what we call the Think Smart, Speak Fluent, or TSSF approach.
Yeah.
And this framework is actually a pretty radical shift. It's less about obsessing over endless grammar charts and, those isolated word lists. It's much more about training your brain for sheer mental efficiency, quickness.
Right. The TSSF approach gives you a clear roadmap to help build that mental quickness. We've synthesized the research from cognitive linguistics, and the science, well, is pretty definitive on this. Fluent speakers are not constantly running these native language subroutines in the background. They are processing meaning, concepts, directly in the target language, in this case, English. That direct pathway. That's the secret sauce, really.
And that's the beautiful thing, isn't it? The cognitive benefit we want to unlock for you. When you manage to bypass that translation middleman, you are taking a massive cognitive load off your working memory. It's like freeing up RAM on a computer that's totally overloaded.
Exactly. It frees up those mental resources, it allows the words to flow much more naturally, and it drastically cuts down on the mental traffic jams that lead to freezing and anxiety.
Oh.
And look, this isn't about being somehow inherently gifted at languages. It's about optimizing the mental process itself, making it highly efficient.
Hmm.
If you want spontaneity, you have to target the brain's processing speed, not just its knowledge base.
Okay, let's unpack this core philosophy then, breaking that translation loop. We know where we want to get, but why does the traditional learning route, memorizing isolated vocab lists, drilling grammar rules, why does that lead so many people straight back into that, well, suffocating translation loop?
Well, it's because it forces this multi-step process for even the simplest communication. Take that classic example you mentioned.
Yeah.
You just want to say, I need bread. Simple, right? But with the traditional method, your brain has to execute maybe 4 or 5 steps. First, the thought in your native language. Then you search for the English words. Then you recall the grammar rule for verb-noun order. Then you assemble the sentence, and finally you speak. That whole elaborate chain of command, it's just too slow. It's too resource intensive for a real-time human conversation.
It sounds exhausting just listing out the steps and this constant switching, this calculation. It must come at a price, right? What exactly is the cognitive cost of constantly jumping between L1 and L2?
It's something known as switch cost. And this is a well-documented phenomenon in cognitive psychology. Every single time your brain switches between those language frames, from activating the idea in your native language, your L1, to trying to find the right structure and words in English, the L2, it uses up significant mental energy. And, what's more, the brain has to exert what's called inhibitory control. It has to actively suppress the native language network from interfering, and that suppression, well, It heavily taxes your working memory.
Wow, okay. That's a fascinating layer I hadn't really considered. So it's not just finding the English words, it's also actively fighting off the words that are trying to pop up in your native tongue, while also trying to build the sentence correctly in English. You're basically juggling, holding the meaning, remembering L2 grammar, and actively pushing down L1 all at the same time. The system seems almost designed to fail under pressure.
Precisely. And that is the engine of hesitation and stumbling. The overloaded system causes the brain to slow down, which then triggers nervousness, which in turn feeds the anxiety, creating that classic vicious cycle of, paralyzing self-consciousness. The TSSF goal is simple. Break that cycle. Install a new, direct, automated mental pathway. Idea straight to English speech.
Okay. Now, I can anticipate a common challenge here. A lot of learners might say, wait, don't I need translation just to learn the words in the first place? How can I really divorce myself from my native language? What's the key difference between using translation to learn and relying on it to speak?
That is probably the most crucial distinction we need to make today. Translation is an excellent tool for that initial first encounter learning. You see a new word, translation gives you a quick hook, a shortcut to its basic meaning. Fine. But if that translation remains your only way of accessing the word when you actually need to use it in conversation, well, then it becomes a severe crutch during active speech production.
So, relying on translation while speaking means you're always operating through your native language instead of truly operating in English.
Exactly. The TSSF approach is all about building rich semantic connections within English itself. So instead of defining a word like resilience only by its quick native language equivalent, you learn to define it using English words and concepts you already know.
Yeah.
The ability to bounce back from difficulty or stamina or maybe mental toughness.
I see. So you're not just borrowing a label from your L1, you're actually owning the concept inside the English network you're building, which means when you need to express the idea of resilience in, say, a meeting, your brain doesn't have to take that detour back to L1. It just accesses the whole L2 cluster related to that idea.
hmm And that massive reduction in mental juggling leads directly to real-world results. Dramatically less anxiety, way more confidence, and the readiness you need for spontaneous situations, whether that's a surprise question in the lecture or just a sudden change of topic in a casual chat.
Got it. So this whole system is really about that mental shift. Phase one is that internal training think smart, and phase two is about the external execution speak fluent. Let's jump into that deep internal work first. Phase one.
All right, phase one, thinking smart. This is the heavy lifting, you could say. It's about reprogramming your inner voice. We're basically aiming to upgrade your cognitive software so that it runs the English program directly without needing that translation layer.
And the absolute cornerstone of this upgrade, the mandatory first step, you're saying, is monolingual thinking exercises.
Correct. You absolutely must consciously carve out time to force your brain to operate only in English. No native language allowed, zero. And we highly recommend starting with short, focused bursts. Think maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day initially.
Okay, why the emphasis on short blocks? For a really serious learner, why not just try to immerse their thoughts all day long? Wouldn't that be faster?
It sounds good in theory, but trying to maintain that level of cognitive suppression and intense effort all day, it's just a recipe for burnout. It's totally unsustainable. You'll inevitably slip back into the comfort zone of your L1. These short blocks should be treated more like intense mental sprints. It's highly focused, high-intensity work that builds that crucial mental stamina much more efficiently.
Okay, mental sprints. I like that. So during these 10 or 15 minutes, what are we actually doing?
We practice what we call think aloud sessions. You essentially become your own narrator. You can do it internally, just in your head, or even in a low whisper if you're alone. Describe your surroundings, your actions, your feelings, your plans for the day. The goal is just continuous flow in English.
And here's the golden rule, which I think is absolutely key to making this technique work. If you don't know a specific English word you need, you absolutely must describe or talk around it using other English words you do know. No cheating with translation.
That rule is sacred. Seriously. because it forces you to leverage the English resources you already possess. It strengthens those internal connections. Start simple, The kettle is on the counter. It needs more water. Fine. Then gradually progress. Move towards more abstract concepts. If you want to talk about, say, ambition, but you can't quite recall that specific word, force yourself to describe it. Something like, it is that powerful feeling, the one that makes a person want to reach a very high place in their career, even if it's difficult.
That seems okay for nouns and simple verbs, but let me push back on this slightly. What if I'm stuck on a really complex, abstract noun, or a nuanced verb that just doesn't have an easy synonym? For an intermediate learner, forcing a purely monolingual definition like that can be incredibly frustrating, can't it? Isn't there a risk they'll just give up because the definitions themselves are too hard?
That's a really valid concern, yeah. And this is where the smart part of TSSF comes into play. When you're dealing with those really abstract concepts, shift your focus. Don't try to define the word itself perfectly. Instead, describe its function or its result. So if you're stuck on the word procrastination, don't wrestle with defining it abstractly. Describe the action or the feeling. You could think, okay, I'm feeling slow today. I know I should start my project, but I keep finding these small tasks to do instead of the big one. You describe the experience of procrastination. This keeps your brain generating English output, and it strengthens the functional link to the concept, even without the exact word.
Ah, I see. That functional description technique sounds like a crucial adaptation, much more practical. And you mentioned journaling helps solidify these patterns too, right?
Immensely. Just doing some stream of consciousness writing in English, without the pressure of having to speak instantly, really helps forge those thinking patterns. It gives you that little bit of extra time to consciously choose the L2 phrasing over the L1 default.
And let's not forget that powerful visual anchor technique, the sticky note method.
Ah, yes. It sounds almost childishly simple, doesn't it? But it creates incredibly powerful, direct mental associations. Label everyday items around you, the mug, the closet door, the remote control, whatever. Every time you see that object, you start to bypass the translation step entirely. The English word just gets retrieved automatically, conditions your brain to stop asking, what's the word for X in English? And instead just see the object and immediately register X.
Right. And the ultimate milestone here, the real sign you've made the shift, is when your complex inner monologues, maybe your arguments with yourself, or even just planning your day in detail, when those naturally start happening in English without you forcing it.
That's the signal.
Yeah.
That's when you know your inner operating system is starting to run English as the default program.
Right.
But of course, that direct thinking needs fuel, right? It needs the actual words and phrases. And as we establish, isolated vocabulary just isn't efficient enough for fluent speech.
Right. Single words often just vanish when you're under pressure. Smart thinking needs language that's already connected, or what you call chunks.
Contextual clustering is the strategy here. A chunk is simply a group of words that native speakers tend to use together automatically. They're like prefabricated units of language that save your brain from having to assemble words according to grammar rules every single time. Think of common phrases like, make a decision, take a break, by the way, or on the other hand.
So the benefit is purely about speed and efficiency then. You don't have to consciously check if you should say do a decision or have a break because the whole package make a decision comes out pre-assembled.
Precisely. You're retrieving 3 or 4 words with basically the same mental effort it takes to retrieve just one. This massively boosts your output speed. And if you use something like a spaced repetition app like Anki or Quizlet, don't just review the chunk itself. Review it with a rich example sentence or even a picture if possible. You need to lock in the usage, the context, not just the dictionary meaning.
And when we're actively reading or listening, we should be putting on our linguistic detective hats, really hunting for these recurring combinations.
Absolutely. Stop reading just for the plot or the main idea for a moment. Start reading for structure. Notice how certain phrases tend to cluster around a topic. If you're reading an article about conflict resolution, maybe you'll notice chunks like reach a compromise, draw the line, or table the discussion. collect them.
And I love that memory trick you mentioned, linking chunks to personal memories.
Yeah, it makes them psychologically stickier, doesn't it? It anchors them. For instance, if you learn the chunk bite the bullet, try linking it to a specific past difficulty you personally overcame. Then, when you need that phrase in a high-pressure conversation, that emotional and personal memory acts as a powerful retrieval hook. It's much stronger than just a definition.
We mentioned that Spanish speaker who had a breakthrough by learning chunks. Instead of trying to translate a really complicated L1 phrase meaning something like, I completely failed to notice that important detail, they simply learned and started using the standard English chunk. I overlooked the detail. Much simpler.
That's the TSSF approach in a nutshell, really. They adopted the common English cognitive structure for expressing that specific idea, completely bypassing the messy, multi-layered L1 translation process. It's about efficiency.
Okay, this next practice, mental rehearsal for real scenarios, sounds incredibly powerful, especially for managing that pre-conversation anxiety.
It really is. It's the power of anticipation combined with the power of TSSF thinking. You visualize upcoming situations that feel high stakes to you, maybe a client meeting, a job interview, even just a difficult phone call you need to make, and you mentally run through possible responses directly in English.
So if I have a job interview coming up, I should be mentally practicing answers to likely questions like, tell me about a time you overcame a challenge. Maybe formulating phrases like, well, in my previous role, I was responsible for leading cross-functional teams, and the key challenge we faced was X. Doing that in my head beforehand.
Yes, exactly. But here's the critical distinction. You're not trying to create robotic word-for-word scripts. That just sounds unnatural and inflexible. Instead, focus on preparing key phrases, core ideas, and useful structures. Think of them as your conversational building blocks. If you have those building blocks ready to go, you can assemble them flexibly and naturally in real time, adapting to how the conversation actually flows.
Right, flexibility, not a rigid script. And this rehearsal time is also the perfect opportunity to integrate those crucial flow elements we talked about.
Definitely. Weave in those connectors and transition words right here in this low-stress mental practice. In addition to this point, however, we also need to consider, to be honest, by practicing them mentally when there's no pressure, they become much more automatic when you are under pressure in the real conversation.
And the final piece of this practice, really bridging that gap between the internal thought and the audible speech.
Yes, you must practice saying these rehearsed lines out loud. Even just whispering them or muttering them under your breath makes a difference. You need to activate that muscle memory. It connects the rapid thought process to the physical act of articulation. This helps ensure that when the high-pressure moment arrives, the words don't just stay trapped inside your head. They can actually come out.
Okay, now we come to what might be the toughest challenge for many, which is directly attacking that old ingrained habit. Minimize translation dependencies. This sounds like it requires serious self-discipline.
It absolutely does. And the most crucial tactical step here is probably the hardest for some. You need to actively ban bilingual dictionaries during any active learning or speaking practice sessions.
Ban them entirely. Wow, that feels drastic, especially for intermediate learners who are constantly encountering new words they don't know. What are they supposed to use instead?
English to English, monolingual dictionaries. This forces your brain to understand the new term using the existing English network you're trying to build. It strengthens those internal connections and prevents that constant detour back to your L1. If you look up a word like, say, ubiquitous, and the definition uses other English words like present everywhere, common, or pervasive, well, you've just potentially cemented 4 English words related to that one core concept, all within the L2 network.
I understand the goal, but let's be honest. For an intermediate learner, looking up a definition only to find 5 other unfamiliar words in that definition, that can be incredibly frustrating, right? Isn't there a real risk they'll just give up because it feels too hard, too slow?
That's a very real risk, and that's why we couple this dictionary strategy with actively developing the skill of circumlocution, which is basically just paraphrasing or talking around the word. If the dictionary definition is too complex, or if you're stuck right in the middle of a conversation and can't find the perfect word, Don't just stop and freeze. Find another way to express the idea using simpler words you do know. That ability to describe ubiquitous as, say, something that you see everywhere nowadays, that ability to talk around the word you don't know is actually a hallmark of advanced fluency. It keeps the conversation flowing and prevents that crippling hesitation.
So we're essentially training the brain to find immediate functional workarounds in English rather than just giving up or defaulting back to translation.
Exactly. And track your progress with this. Keep a conscious log, maybe just a mental note or a quick journal entry, of how often your brain jumps back to your native language during your thinking sessions. Actively try to reduce that number week by week. And for low-level, constant exposure, the simplest trick is just making English your default environment wherever possible. Change your phone language, your computer OS, your social media feeds to English. Make it the air you breathe digitally.
Okay, let's transition slightly to the idea of incorporating mindfulness for focused thinking. Now, for many people, fluency feels synonymous with speed and, maybe complexity. So the idea of bringing in mindfulness might seem a bit counterintuitive at first.
Well, fluency isn't just about speed. It's fundamentally about control. And control requires focus. Anxiety absolutely undermines that focus. When you start to panic in a conversation, your prefrontal cortex, that's the area responsible for complex language production and executive function, it gets flooded with stress hormones. And guess what happens? The interference from your L1 often becomes much stronger in those moments. Mindfulness helps you manage that internal chaos.
So less anxiety means less L1 interference, which means a clearer pathway for the L2 for English to come through.
Absolutely. And a practical way to work on this is using meditation apps, but specifically look for ones that offer guided sessions in English. This actually accomplishes two important things at once. First, you train your mind to stay calm and centered, which is essential for managing the inherent stress of speaking a foreign language. And second, you simultaneously get valuable, calming L2 input directly into your ears.
That's a highly efficient use of practice time, definitely. And you also mentioned the importance of having a dedicated practice space, mentally speaking.
Yeah, try to avoid multitasking during your Think in English practice sessions. Give it your full, undivided attention, even if it's just for those 10-15 minutes. And interestingly, integrating this language thinking with simple physical activity, like just going for a walk while you narrate your thoughts in English, can actually help ground the practice. It makes the language feel less academic, less like something that only happens in a classroom setting, and more like a real tool for navigating the actual world.
And we shouldn't underestimate the power of positive self-talk here either, should we?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Consciously use affirmations in English. My thoughts are flowing smoothly. I am speaking clearly and confidently today. Now, this isn't just about feeling good. It's actively priming your mental state. It builds mental resilience and helps combat that panic response when a conversation suddenly takes a difficult or unexpected turn.
Okay, fantastic. So we've successfully rewired the engine, so to speak, through the think smart phase. Now, phase two, speak fluent. How do we ensure that all that smooth internal processing actually translates into smooth, audible speech?
This phase really starts with giving yourself a necessary dose of permission. And that comes in the form of embrace the 70% rule for imperfect fluency.
Ah, the 70% rule. I think this might be one of the most liberating concepts we'll discuss today. Tell us more about it and how it helps overcome that crippling perfectionism.
Perfectionism is, without a doubt, the single biggest barrier to actually speaking. The 70% rule states this. If you are about 70% confident you can get your main point across, even if it's not grammatically perfect, even if the vocabulary isn't ideal, just say it. Do not wait for 100% certainty or flawless grammatical perfection before you open your mouth.
Okay, I get the logic, but how do we manage the anxiety that comes from knowingly speaking imperfectly? That 30% gap, that potential for error, is terrifying for a lot of learners.
You manage it by consciously shifting your goalpost. The immediate goal in that moment is communication and flow, not flawless accuracy. You almost need to internally script a mindset shift for yourself. Okay, I know I might make a mistake here, but getting my idea heard now is more valuable than getting stuck in silence trying to be perfect. You have to treat that 70% output as a necessary first draft. You can always refine the accuracy later, maybe self-correct or ask for clarification, but you cannot refine silence. Prioritize the momentum. Keep the conversation moving.
Right, momentum over perfection in the moment. And when you do hit those moments of uncertainty mid-sentence, how do you manage the pauses without just freezing up completely?
Use smart pauses. These are basically strategic fillers that buy your brain valuable thinking time without completely losing the floor or sounding lost. Instead of just stammering, use natural conversational phrases that native speakers use all the time. Things like, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. Or, oh, why should I put this? Or even just a thoughtful, It maintains the flow while your brain catches up behind the scenes.
And simplifying complex thoughts is key too, right?
Absolutely. If you have a really detailed or nuanced thought you want to express, don't try to translate the full complexity perfectly in one massive, convoluted sentence. That's a recipe for disaster. Break it down. State the core idea simply first. Get the main point out. Then use your building blocks, your chunks and connectors, to add the detail and complexity afterwards. Simple core first, then elaboration.
And to really train that pure conversational momentum, pushing past hesitation, we use timed free speaking.
Yes. Set a timer, maybe just 2 minutes to start, or 5 if you're feeling ambitious, and just talk nonstop about anything that comes to mind.
Hmm.
Your day, a movie you saw, your opinion on something, anything. The iron rule is you cannot stop to correct yourself. Even if you know you made a mistake, just keep going. This trains your brain to keep pushing past those inevitable mistakes and internal resistance. It's far, far better to articulate an imperfect idea fluidly than to freeze entirely while desperately trying to construct the perfect sentence in your head. Momentum overcomes those memory gaps.
Okay, that makes sense. Next up, we need to leverage connectors and fillers for smooth flow. You called these the mortar between the bricks of our ideas earlier.
They are absolutely essential, yes. Transition words are the glue that transforms potentially choppy, basic sentences into speech that sounds coherent, logical, and frankly more sophisticated. They act as signposts for your listener, showing them exactly how your new thought connects to the previous one.
So, what are the key functional groups of connectors we should really focus on mastering first?
It's useful to master them by their function, yeah. So maybe group them like this. 1. To add information. Words like furthermore, in addition, moreover, even just and also. 2. To show contrast. Crucial ones like however, on the other hand, conversely, although, but. 3. To show cause-effect. Things like therefore, as a result, consequently, so, because of this.
Learning these actually forces you to structure your spoken thoughts more logically, doesn't it? Instead of just listing ideas like, I like hiking, it's good exercise, it's beautiful. You practice transforming that into a more structured argument.
Exactly. You might practice saying, I really enjoy hiking, primarily because it's fantastic exercise. In addition, it provides me with a wonderful opportunity to connect with nature. See the difference? This is actually why participating in something like a casual debate club, or even just friendly debates with language partners, is such fantastic practice. It forces you to use those connectors dynamically, agreeing, disagreeing, adding counterpoints, all in real time. And don't be afraid to use a little connector cheat sheet during your practice sessions initially. It helps offload the mental burden of remembering the structural words while you focus on the ideas. Eventually, they become automatic.
Right. Now for maybe the step that requires the most honesty with ourselves. Record and refine your output. You simply can't fix problems you don't know you have.
Self-feedback is absolutely non-negotiable if you're serious about reaching high levels of fluency. Get in the habit of recording yourself regularly. Doesn't have to be long, maybe just a quick 2-minute summary of your day or your thoughts on a movie you watched or an article you read. Then, and this is the important part, listen back critically.
Okay, and what specifically should we be listening for beyond just, basic grammar mistakes or vocabulary errors?
Focus heavily on flow, clarity, and pinpointing your hesitation points. Where did you stumble? Where did you pause unnaturally? But also, crucially, pay attention to your rhythm and intonation. Are you emphasizing the important words in the sentence? Or does your speech pattern sound kind of flat and robotic? A flat, monotonous tone often signals a brain that's still translating or overly focused on accuracy. Varied natural intonation usually suggests more confidence and direct thought in English.
Ah, and that's where shadowing comes back in,
Yeah.
but used as a refining tool this time.
That's a perfect application, yes. Record yourself shadowing a short, high-quality audio clip, maybe a podcast snippet or a speech. Then play your recorded version immediately followed by the original native speaker version. Compare them directly. You'll instantly hear where your rhythm, your stress patterns, your intonation diverge from the model. It's very revealing.
And what about the idea of actually transcribing the parts where we struggle? That sounds intensive.
It can be, but it's incredibly effective. Transcribe word for word the exact sections where you stumbled, hesitated badly, or really struggled to find the right words. Just a sentence or two. Then consciously rewrite that transcribed section to be smoother and clearer. Use the chunks and connectors you've been learning. Actively re-engineer that problematic sentence. This process directly links the speaking fix back to the thinking fix. You are literally seeing your internal bottlenecks written down on paper and then actively engineering a better, smoother alternative.
And we should leverage modern tools here too, shouldn't we?
Absolutely. AI-powered tools can be fantastic for getting objective critique. Many apps now can pinpoint pronunciation issues, analyze the consistency of your pace, and even give you feedback on where your rhythm or intonation feels unnatural compared to native patterns. They can help you quickly move from saying a flat, maybe translation-influenced sentence like, "Today was a day which contained many things for me to do," to something much more natural and vivid like, "Oh, today was just absolutely hectic. Meetings pretty much back-to-back all day." That's the goal.
Okay, great. So we've built up the internal thinking structure. We've worked on refining the physical delivery. The final push seems to be about output-focused immersion.
This is really where the rubber meets the road, as they say. You absolutely must place yourself in environments where speaking English is required, not just optional.
Yeah, passively sitting in an English meeting doesn't really count if you never actually have to contribute or respond, right?
Exactly. You need situations where output is expected. Join an English debate club, find a book club that discusses in English, or seek out language exchange meetups where conversation is the primary, unavoidable activity. If speaking is always optional, your brain, being efficient, will often take the path of least resistance and just passively listen. You need to force the output.
Okay, can you give us maybe two specific activities that really force that immediate processing and output?
Sure. First one, narrating videos. Find a short video clip online, maybe an action scene, a nature documentary, snippet, whatever. Play it with the sound off and try to describe aloud exactly what is happening on screen in real time. This forces immediate visual to verbal processing, completely bypassing the L1 translation step because you don't have time for it. Second activity, summarizing news articles aloud. Read a short news article, then put away completely. Immediately try to explain the main points out loud,
Yeah.
in your own words, as if you were telling someone about it. This hits the trifecta. You have to process the input, mentally structure the key information, and then produce spontaneous speech about it. It's a fantastic all-around exercise.
This one really effective. Okay, so we've covered all these different components, the thinking strategies, the speaking practice. How do we make sure they don't just remain a collection of isolated tips? How do we integrate them for genuine synergy?
Yeah, it's all about combining the preparation phase with the output phase in your regular practice. One really powerful integrated practice is shadowing with thought preparation. So let's say you're about to shadow an audio clip about, I don't know, investment strategies. Before you even hit play, take just 3 minutes to mentally brainstorm, in English, every relevant phrase or concept you already know related to that topic. Diversifying risk, long-term growth, market volatility, bull market, bear market, whatever comes to mind.
Okay, so you're actively priming the relevant English concept network in your brain before you even hear and repeat the target language.
Exactly. That makes the subscript shadowing infinitely more effective. The phrases you hear and repeat are much stickier because you've actively activated those concepts in your mind already. So you're ready for them.
And another great integrated practice you mentioned is weaving this into daily routines with dual focus.
Right. As you maybe narrate your simple daily tasks to yourself making breakfast, getting ready for work, consciously think ahead about the structure and the reasoning you'll use in your internal narration. Don't just think, I am making coffee. Think something like, okay, I must make this coffee because I really need the caffeine in order to be able to focus properly during the meeting this morning.
Hmm.
This links the mental preparation, identifying the cause-effect relationship, the purpose, directly to the verbal output, making the thinking more structured.
It makes thinking in English a structured habit rather than just a random internal monologue.
Precisely. And don't forget group interactions. If you know the potential topics for an upcoming meeting or discussion, don't just show up cold. Spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes beforehand brainstorming key phrases, arguments, and ideas related to those topics. Maybe sketch out a quick mind map in English. Having those concepts and phrases preloaded means your spoken contributions during the actual event will likely be faster, more coherent, and definitely more confident.
Of course, no learner's journey is ever perfectly smooth. We need strategies for tackling those inevitable common roadblocks. What happens when you feel like you've hit a plateau? You're practicing, but you just feel stuck. You're not improving anymore.
Plateaus are almost always a sign of routine stagnation. Your brain has gotten too comfortable. The solution is usually variety and novelty. Inject something new into your routine. If you've been religiously consuming news articles for 6 months, maybe switch gears completely for a week or two. Try learning song lyrics, or translating a complex poem, or analyzing the language in a movie script. If you only listen to serious historical podcasts, maybe switch to watching fast-paced stand-up comedy specials. Anything different. Novelty forces your brain to adapt and learn new patterns, breaking you out of the rut.
Okay, novelty for plateaus. What about probably the most debilitating roadblock of all for many learners? Just overwhelming anxiety and that constant fear of making mistakes.
This one really requires gradual exposure. Think of it like desensitization therapy. Start small in very safe environments. Begin with just self-talk, then maybe recording yourself where no one else hears. Then find one very safe, supportive person, maybe a trusted tutor or a very patient friend to have short, low-stakes conversations with. Then gradually move to a small, friendly group setting and constantly remind yourself of the 70% rule. Use it as your permission slip to speak imperfectly. You have to internalize the idea that making mistakes is simply the unavoidable cost of entry for achieving fluency. It's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of effort.
That's a great mindset shift. What about the really common practical problem of just time shortage? People are busy, they have jobs, families. They feel they can't possibly dedicate 2 hours a day to this.
This is where micro-practices become essential. Forget the idea that you need huge, dedicated study blocks every day. Turn your dead time spent commuting, waiting in line, walking the dog into mini-language labs. 5 minutes of thinking in English while walking the dog. 10 minutes mentally translating street signs or advertising slogans while you're on the bus. Narrating your actions while doing chores, it all adds up. These little bursts accumulate into significant cognitive priming over the course of a week or a month. Consistency beats intensity here.
And maintaining motivation over the long haul, over months or even years. That's tough.
Yeah, it is. Tracking your progress visibly can really help here. Keep a simple journal of your practice steps, maybe tick off days you did your Think Aloud session on a calendar, or use a simple app to log your activities. Seeing concrete evidence of your consistent effort, even small efforts, really fuels motivation. Also, find community. Join online language learning groups, find language partners. Having that shared accountability and seeing others on the same journey can be incredibly inspiring and keep you going when your own motivation dips.
And just quickly, for the very advanced, highly fluent speakers listening, how do they keep pushing themselves using these principles?
Challenge yourself with nuance and complexity. Explore regional dialects. Try understanding thick Scottish slang versus Southern U.S. idioms. Delve into highly specific, niche professional jargon in your field. Or try tackling fast-paced improvised comedy or witty banter in movies or TV shows. This constantly forces your brain to expand its adaptive processing capabilities and handle language at its most complex and unpredictable.
Okay, fantastic. Let's wrap up this rich toolkit with some concrete essential resources that really support this TSSF methodology. What should people be looking for?
Well, for mastering those quick, clear communication skills that directly feed into fluency, the podcast Think Fast, Talk Smart from Stanford GSP is excellent. It's not language learning specific, but the principles are highly relevant. And for practical daily input and good models of natural conversational English, any resources associated with channels like Easy English Talk often provide great examples of authentic speech patterns to listen to and maybe shadow.
What about specific apps for finding practice partners or working on those chunks we talked about?
You could utilize apps like Duolingo, but specifically focus on the sections that teach phrases or sentences to learn language in meaningful chunks, not just isolated words. For finding actual conversational output practice, platforms like italki or Cambly are fantastic for connecting with tutors and language partners who understand the value of spontaneous conversation over just drilling grammar rules. You can specifically ask them to focus on fluency practice.
And are there any essential books you'd recommend that really get into the theory behind this approach?
A book that aligns really well with the TSSF methodology is Fluent Forever by Gabriel Weiner. It focuses heavily on building those internal semantic networks and thinking directly in the target language using powerful memory techniques like spaced repetition and visual association. It explains the why behind many of these strategies.
And where can our listeners find that sense of community you mentioned?
Online communities can be great. Reddit has a massive and generally very supportive language learning subreddit, language learning. And YouTube, of course, is an absolute goldmine. Channels like Leap English with Gil or Luke's English podcast offer excellent, extensive listening and shadowing materials, often with transcripts. Also, look for channels that focus specifically on habit building and the daily implementation of strategies like the ones we've discussed today. There are quite a few popping up. Okay, theory is great, practice strategies are essential, but let's bring this all to life now with some concrete case studies, real examples of people who used this kind of mindset shift to achieve breakthrough fluency. Let's start with Luca's polyglot pivot.
Right, Luca. He was a teenager in Rome, apparently quite knowledgeable academically about English, but completely paralyzed when it came to actually speaking. Terrified, even. He was the classic victim of that internal translation loop, wasn't he? To the point where he literally had to just point at menus when traveling because the words wouldn't come out. That mental block sounds severe.
It was.
Yeah.
And his pivot, his breakthrough, didn't come from taking more traditional classes. It came from massive amounts of joyful, self-directed input. He started devouring English comics and graphic novels. He got completely absorbed in the stories, the narrative worlds, and gradually the characters' dialogue, their specific phrasing, their emotional language, how they actually spoke, started to become his own internal voice for English.
Wow. So he effectively bypassed translation by adopting a fully realized English persona, borrowing the voice of a character he liked.
Exactly. And when he finally found himself immersed in the U.S. later on, he still felt overwhelmed by the speed of natural conversation. His breakthrough mental trick, then, was to use pop culture as an anchor. He'd consciously ask himself, okay, how would a character from my favorite American TV show, maybe a fast-talking comedian or a cool action hero, how would they respond in this situation?
Yeah.
He used that external anchor, that persona, to instantly generate direct contextual English responses without getting stuck in translation. He went from basically silent to comfortably conversational. And as the story goes, he now speaks something like 14 languages, proving the power of actively internalizing the language rather than just studying it passively.
That anchoring technique is brilliant for spontaneous retrieval. Okay, how about Robbie Kucker's Irish Odyssey? Different situation.
Yeah, Robbie. He arrived in Dublin back in 2004 with pretty broken English, took an isolating job in a warehouse. He found that the traditional grammar books he tried just weren't helping him at all. They didn't equip him for the fast-paced, context-heavy banter and the specific slang of the Irish accent he was hearing all around him. He was constantly running that slow, costly L1 to L2 switch in his head.
And this breakthrough came when he took a different job, right? At a call center where that real-time, high-pressure communication was absolutely mandatory, no hiding.
That's right. That environment forced him to confront the reality. He quickly realized that fluent conversation isn't really about abstract book knowledge. It's much more about rhythm, delivery, and using the right chunks automatically.
Hmm.
So he started intensely shadowing Irish TV soap opera shows, known for their fast, natural, often emotional dialogue. He didn't just listen passively, he actively mimicked the accent, the intonation patterns, the natural chunks of language they used. He repeated them obsessively until they started feeling natural, until they were cemented in his own speech patterns.
So he really focused heavily on the delivery and the rhythm key parts of that speak fluent phase we talked about.
Exactly. And his personal triumph, the moment he knew he'd cracked it, was during a customer service call when the English just flowed effortlessly, smoothly, without that painful mental hesitation and calculation he used to experience. He realized he had finally internalized the L2 pattern of speech for Irish English. His story really proves that high-volume, context-rich input combined with active shadowing can be far superior to just isolated dictionary study when your goal is real-world fluency.
And finally, let's look at Maria's Portuguese passion. Her challenge was slightly different. She could practice confidently alone, but struggled with shyness when speaking to others.
Right, Maria from Lisbon. Apparently, she could speak quite confidently to her mirror, inventing complex stories and arguments in English when she was alone. Her internal thinking in English was getting quite strong, but the moment a tutor or a peer was actually present, she would just clam up, freeze. So her internal think smart engine was running, but the speak fluent connection was being blocked by performance anxiety.
So, how did she manage to bridge that gap between internal competence and external performance?
Through sheer joyful saturation and what you might call integrated input. She reportedly read over 1,000 English books, novels, nonfiction, everything. And she listened constantly to English podcasts during commutes while cooking whenever she could. She essentially made English her primary mental environment. She lived in an English world inside her head. This massive, continuous input normalized the language to such an incredible extent that when it finally came time to speak in real situations, the language wasn't coming from a place of conscious study or effortful retrieval. It was coming from a place of deep, natural experience.
And her defining moment was actually in an academic setting, wasn't it?
Yes. The story goes she had to present complex ideas during her master's degree seminar in Edinburgh. And because of that deep, saturated input she'd cultivated over years, she found she had almost instant access to the sophisticated L2 vocabulary and complex sentence structures she needed. She didn't freeze. She delivered her points confidently with a steady voice. Her story beautifully highlights how joyfully embedding TSSF principles, especially massive input and internal thinking into every part of your daily life, can lead to profound, resilient fluency, even overcoming significant shyness.
And just a quick mention of a few other learners whose stories echo these principles.
Yeah, briefly, there was Diana, who apparently was paralyzed by interview fear but used mindset shifts, the 70% rule, and recording her practice output to handle high-pressure job interviews confidently. She moved past needing captions on videos to actually getting job offers in English. There was Charmin, who had a tendency to rush her words in meetings due to anxiety. She consciously worked on her rhythm and pacing through recording and shadowing, which dramatically improved her professional communication flow and clarity. And Pakanko, who started learning seriously in his 60s during the lockdown period. He proved that age is absolutely no barrier by using intense TSSF study, particularly focusing on monolingual thinking exercises to achieve conversational fluency much faster than he expected.
Amazing stories. So, to wrap up, you now have a comprehensive two-phase system laid out for you. We've journeyed from the deep internal work understanding the cognitive science of switch cost, setting those mental traps with things like the sticky note method, and dedicating focused time for monolingual thinking, all the way through to very practical output strategies, like embracing that liberating 70% rule and learning to utilize strategic fillers to maintain flow.
It really is a complete system designed to help you rewire your brain to think directly in English and
Yeah.
therefore speak English much more spontaneously and confidently. And the final message really is simple. Start now, start small. But above all, be consistent. Consistency is the absolute engine of neuroplasticity, of retraining your brain.
Yeah, just pick one thing from today's discussion. Maybe it's committing to a 10-minute think aloud session tomorrow morning. Maybe it's deciding to ban the bilingual dictionary just for your next reading session. Just start building that positive momentum because that fluent future you're aiming for really depends on creating these consistent, smart habits starting today.
And if you found this deep dive into thinking smart and speaking fluent helpful, please do consider sharing this discussion with someone else you know who might be struggling with that frustrating translation barrier. Let them know these strategies exist.
Absolutely. And as always, we like to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to maybe chew on as you apply these ideas in your own practice this week.
Okay, here it is. If fluent language use is truly, fundamentally about thinking directly about conceptualization in the target language, rather than about constant translation, what does that really imply about how we view traditional grammar rules? What assumptions about needing to know every single rule perfectly might we actually need to let go of to truly free our minds to speak spontaneously? If the primary goal is speed and flow in real conversation, how much of that ingrained expectation of perfect accuracy is actually holding us back?
Hmm. That's definitely a deep one to ponder. Food for thought indeed. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.